All right, now that it's 2 o'clock, we'll go ahead and get started. So there's a few reminders to everyone before we jump in. I just want to remind everyone to mute your microphones so that we don't get too much background noise and disruption. If I see anyone has unmuted, I'll go ahead and take care of that myself. We also ask for this talk that you save questions for the end instead of interrupting during the talk. There are a couple of different ways you can ask questions. We'll have sort of an open time at the end to ask questions if you want to save your question until then. You can type it in the chat, and I'll go through that at the end of the talk as well and get any questions there. I'll also post a link in the chat to a place where you can post questions anonymously in case you don't want to ask the question yourself. And I'll make sure that those questions get addressed as well. So on that note, I'll introduce our speaker. We're very lucky today to have Dr. Donna Dean. She got her PhD in biochemistry from Duke and spent much of her career at the FDA and NIH, and has worked with organizations such as the American Chemical Society, Association for Women in Science, and the National Academies. She has far more accolades and awards than I can possibly mention in this short time. She's a fellow of the American Institute for Medical and Biomedical Engineers, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. The list goes on. She has many awards for her scientific research and leadership, for mentoring, and for advocating for women and other underrepresented groups in STEM fields. So with that, I'd like to welcome Donna to our talk our seminar this week, and take it away.
Thank you, and hello everyone. While I'm getting my screen up for you so we can start our show. Welcome to you wherever you are in this day of Zoom and virtual presentations. I would have loved to have been together with all of you in person and had a lot more time for interaction and discussions, but we do what we can best, and that is we'll go right ahead with it. I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to sail through the slides relatively quickly since they will be available for you later, and I invite you just to sit back and listen, think about the things that you want to think about. And anytime when we start talking about the topic of mentoring, whether you're a mentor or a mentee, is always, well, where do I begin? Where do I start with this process? You all have already done it because of that online survey of thinking about things in advance of what you wanted to think about, what you may need in the mentoring relationships. And you can see here I created just a graphic. The top four, again, not surprising for scientists or anyone in a role of mentoring, is wanting to figure out goals, expectations, communication, mentee productivity, and how you provide feedback. And then, of course, self-care and overall wellness, not just at this time, but in general, in a career and in forming mentee relationships. So those were the things that you identified in the pre-survey. And then thinking about the topics of mentoring, it was a slightly wider distribution of the topics you raised, but again, not surprising that wanting to know how to organize and prioritize the work, looking at professional development skills. What are those skills you might want to have, about career planning tools, advice, again, mental health and mental well-being, again, work-life balance. As you can see, the other variety of things. Again, I give you accolades for free thinking about this in advance, because if you're thinking about a mentoring relationship, whether you are in a mentoring role or a mentee, and I would say at this point, you're never too old or too young to be a mentor or a mentee, because we all have many both of those roles in a number of circumstances. But just basically thinking about any possible mentoring relationship that you might feel that you need is ask yourself, why? Why do I need this? What am I expecting of this particular mentoring relationship? How are we going to approach this mentoring relationship? And when are we going to do it? Just some very fundamental, very, very basic questions that can sort of help frame. And a necessary part of a good mentoring relationship is your own introspection, sort of your own self-analysis, not only about what you, but thinking very seriously about, okay, what do I need in a mentoring relationship? What are those things that I need for someone to mentor me on, or what are my needs as a mentor as I want to mentor other people? And of course, the wants are the other things that it's nice to have. But again, this helps hone in on what's the most critical things that you need in the mentoring relationship. It's very useful to think about also at this time where the past mentoring relationships or mentoring experiences that you may have had went off track, where things didn't work out. Where did they go? Why did they go off track? What happened? Again, just a matter of reflection. We're all scientists. We know we very often learn the most about those experiments and designs that didn't work the first or the second or the third time. And as scientists, we go back and we reflect on that. Bring that same set of skills. Hopefully each of you on this seminar kind of have some sense of where you are in terms of either your own mentoring needs as a mentee, or your comfort level of where you are in terms of being a mentor to others. And again, by the pre-survey, a lot of you have done a lot of thinking about this in advance and reflecting on how it might affect your career. So let's jump into some concepts about mentoring. One of the things I'd like to make very clear about the difference is we throw all kinds of titles around about mentors, advisors, coaches, sponsors, bosses. I think it's really important to think that a mentor is anyone who has some experience, who is a person you trust, who can provide advice, perspective. A mentor can sometimes be someone much, much younger than you are, either career-wise or age-wise. But nevertheless, it's a person who has some degree of experience and someone who you trust. An advisor, most of us have been graduate students or postdocs or are in those roles now. That is usually the person we might work for, the person we work with, the person that's responsible for making sure we get the training we need. So an advisor is someone who does have authority. Maybe they have institutional authority, maybe they have authority because of years of experience, positions they hold. I always briefly throw in coach because coaches are usually people who actually do this in general as a profession that want to help you, that if you need help with a specific skill, just like if you were an athlete and you wanted to further develop your abilities in an area, you would have a coach. And then a sponsor, as you move on in your career, a sponsor is someone that is sort of an advanced kind of mentor, if you will, that actually is there to stand up and advocate for you in settings, advocate for you maybe to serve on an editorial board, advocate for you to serve on a committee. And I like to think of a mentor as being someone who is working behind the scenes to help you be better at what you want to do behind the scenes. A sponsor is a person who is willing to stand up publicly and advocate for you, put their credibility on the line about your abilities and what you can do. And then a supervisor can be a boss, an advisor, whatever. That person is the one whom the organization holds responsible for overseeing your work. For graduate students and postdocs, that is usually your graduate professor or your graduate advisor. Something that this point I have on this slide, I think is a very important point, is that a mentor is not by definition your PhD advisor or postdoc or fellowship supervisor, although many of those individuals are mentors in the best sense of the term. And for those of you on here who are mentors and who may be overseeing graduate students or postdocs or other researchers, this is not a pejorative view. It's just a point to make the point that no single one of us can be everything another single person would need as a mentor. Some of us have been fortunate enough to have very good PhD advisors or postdoctoral supervisors who have been very good mentors. Others of us have had people in those roles who may have only been mentors in helping us learn the science, but not in other aspects of our career. But nevertheless, we're not going to get too terribly hung up on the mentoring terminology, but I do find those helpful, and that's how I actually tend to think of the various roles that people can play in your career. So again, if you think about being trained in a scientific, technological engineering discipline, as we've done research, we have all of these skills and are developing all of these skills of analysis, to plan, to schedule, to multitask, and increasingly to be able to communicate about our work, not only to our peers and colleagues, but to others who may not be as experienced in our research area. So you think about bringing all of these tasks to mentoring. So again, your analytical techniques, thinking about this. And as I highlighted, there are key areas for which you need mentoring. And if you are watching this seminar from the mentor's perspective, sort of put on that hat and think about this is what your mentees would need. Obviously, very important to make sure you have the right professional credentials to do whatever career path that you want to do. That point was highlighted by a lot of you in the pre-seminar survey. And the professional credentials aren't just knowing your science, the area of science, but it's the other credentials, like knowing how to share and communicate about your work, how to present your work in oral presentations, poster presentations, scientific literature, national seminars, webinars, seminars within your lab group, all of that, working with people. All of that group of skills that you need to help you move along your career pathways of success. Again, these are areas that each of you can think about. Is this an area that I think I need mentoring in? For some of you, it may be very resonant. Others, it might be. But obviously, this one is absolutely pivotal in our fields as professionals. Mentors can be particularly helpful to their mentees in this regard, to help mentees recognize opportunities that may appear before them that might not be obvious to them. They can be as simple as someone asking you to serve on a local committee that might give you a little bit more experience. But just learning how to recognize opportunities is a job skill that is something that I think we all have had to develop if we've had something approximating a successful career. Because very often, particularly in the early stages of our careers, we may not recognize something as a good opportunity. And that is where the more experienced people, whether by career, by age, or by being in the organization, can point out, well, this is a great opportunity to step forward and do this. Probably one of the most critical aspects for those of us who have been in mentoring roles is to share the mistakes and missteps that you've had in your own career or in your choices. Because again, I alluded to it early on in terms of in science, we are used to, if our experiments don't work, or if the design doesn't work, or the database, our theoretical model doesn't work, we go back and we rework it and we rethink it. And sometimes, as we're thinking about our career path and our career growth, sometimes we can continue in the same direction, but we might have to make a couple of U-turns. Other times, there may be things that have happened in your career that you may have to make a new U-turn and go in a different direction. And through my career, both of these kinds of things happened to me on my career path. There were times when I had to take several U-turns to keep going in the same direction. And a couple of times I had to actually completely change directions. Maybe not necessarily because of mistakes or missteps, but I have found that when I talk to mentees who are facing similar kinds of things that I faced then, I can at least tell them, well, I didn't recognize that this was what was going on. And sometimes it can be, laboratory dynamics. Sometimes it can just be beating your head against the wall, trying to make experiments go in a certain direction when they won't go. This is very valuable because none of us as mentors are perfect individuals. And to the extent that we can share appropriately our mistakes and missteps, I think that is a way of being encouraging. Dealing with biases and misconceptions. We all have a lot of unconscious bias. They can be biases and misconceptions about other fields of science. We're all in science, and we all know there's kind of an informal hierarchy as certain fields of science think they're better than other fields, and they talk about those other people over there in that field are not terribly quantitative and they can't do it. So we all have biases and misconceptions about other areas of science. We have bias and misconceptions about those people who are around us. And we have biases and misconceptions very often about people who come from other cultures. This, again, is, I think, a very important area for mentoring. A number of you highlighted the issue of cultural differences or getting used to a new culture in a new place. And it can be as simple as, say you came out of the Caltech culture and now you're at the University of South Dakota culture. That's a cultural change. And so if you've made that move, a person who might be your mentor in South Dakota would be telling you, well, in South Dakota, this is what works. And these are your misconceptions. And again, mentoring to help you understand, well, this is how our culture works. In our culture, everybody takes a coffee break at 10:30. This is something you should use as an opportunity. Very minor things about the workplace, very minor things about the field, very important things about the field. And I found that every field has these, and just dealing with your own biases and understanding that you have them and figuring them out, again, can be areas that can help you in mentoring. It's really important to know what your career, the sense of your own career direction is. Is the timing good? Mentors can help you figure that out. Mentees should be developing a sense of, okay, what's my general career direction? What's the timing of when I should do things? If I'm beginning to finish my postdoc, what's the timing of when I should spend looking for my next position? What should I do? Again, very, very important to at least have a sense. None of us can 100% predict how our career directions were going to be. Another area for mentoring is you can seek role models that are people that you want to emulate, people who have characteristics, whether they can be good public speaking skills, wonderful PowerPoint slides for their presentations, good laboratory rapport with the people in their laboratory. All of those can be areas that can be mentoring experiences for you. I would also say I like the term anti-role models or anti-mentors. There have been a few people that I would consider my mentors who were perfectly fine people, perfectly credible people, very professional people, but they made choices in their career for career directions that were not career directions that resonated with me, or decisions or choices. So in that sense, they helped me sort of test, this is what, well, I don't really want to do that, but this, I think, is where my interest lies. So when you think about the appropriate role models, there are people that can help you if you want to move in those directions, be the kind of person that person is, or they can be the kind of role model that you may not want to be, which is not necessarily a negative judgment about the person. It's just ways of figuring out how to pursue your own pathway. Again, part of what a mentor can do and a mentee, you can figure out, okay, what's the right workplace for me? Whether it's a geography of a place or what is the type of workplace. We do a lot of this in our online career consulting now with the American Chemical Society. And we find that some of the people we're talking to really want to be in industry. Others really want to be in academia. Others want to be in government, and some want to be in business for themselves or go into a small business setting or be a consultant. So we spend a fair amount of time in our one-on-one consultations with them, helping them figure out which niche or which area they think they would like to be in next. Again, not for a lifetime, because no career choice is necessary for a lifetime. But again, helping figure out, sometimes the right workplace can be very geographically dependent. Because of maybe personal life considerations, a partner, a spouse who is also pursuing a career either in your area or a different one, and you're constrained to a certain geography of where there are the positions. Or the geography may be because of family and cultural reasons, or they may be for socio-political reasons. There may be areas and geographies that you don't want to live in. That again, that's finding the right workplace. There might be types of institutions you either do or do not want to be working for. Again, all of those can be areas of mentoring to help you sort through those. And of course, mentoring is always good for helping you figure out how to have a healthy balance in life. I don't know there are very few scientists that I know who actually have felt that we've been comfortable having a really healthy balance in life. And figuring out that balance and achieving that balance, I think, is a constant challenge. I admit now, as so many of us are sequestered at home, again, there are new challenges in having an appropriate balance when the workplace is also the home place. But this, I think this is where particularly experienced mentors can share their experience. So if I have a mentee, I can share a lot of rich stories of how I've made wrong choices about putting too much of me into the workplace and too little of me for other things, and where the extra effort in the workplace really made no difference. But again, that's something that we all have to strive for. Working 24/7 may be a healthy balance for some people. It isn't for most of us. And that, again, is an area of mentoring that can really, really help. And then obviously, as I said, you're never too old or never too young to be a mentor. Part of being a mentor is figuring out how to create all kinds of opportunities for others, whatever those opportunities might be. It means sometimes not tenaciously holding on to something that you always do, but sharing it with someone else, maybe mentoring someone else to learn how to do a task or an activity. But creating opportunities is also a very important embodiment of mentoring. Mentoring is also very useful for both the mentor and the mentee about knowing when it is time to move on. Excuse me. Knowing when to move on. Sometimes knowing when to move on can mean moving to another place. Sometimes it can be moving on to the next phase in your career. But very often in the world of research, knowing when to move on can be when to leave a problem, or when you have truly reached a blind alley in that problem and you cannot make any further progress. And I alluded earlier to having made probably some not as wise decision making that led to U-turns, is that I tenaciously held on to some research problems or a research approach in both graduate school and in my postdoc years, beyond when I probably should have abandoned it. I did one complex set of experiments where probably if I had done 5 replications of that very complex experiment, that would have probably told me enough information that I needed to know that I wasn't going to get the answers that I needed. But I very doggedly did it 25 times. And I didn't get any different results the 25th time than I did the 5th time. So I think sometimes knowing when to move on is part of a career, it's part of life, and it's part of our approach to projects. And then a very important area too is to get mentoring is learning how to move beyond whatever your comfort zones are in taking risk. Not just any risk, but a strategic risk. Maybe it can be designing a new approach to an experiment. Sometimes it can be initiating a collaboration that other people have not initiated with a certain area of expertise. And whatever is your normal comfort zone is going to be unique to you. I tend to be a fairly high-level risk taker, so that what is a strategic risk that I might take, sometimes, particularly once I became a supervisor and would take strategic risks as a federal manager, some of my peers said they would not dare take those risks. But again, they were strategic, that you them strategically because they're thought out. They're well thought out, at least as best you can prior to you undertake the action. But you also have an out, because I am convinced, if any of you have cats, that if this cat has trouble, if these dogs go after the cat has a very tall post over here that it can run and jump on. So if you're really going to take strategic risks in your organization or in places where you're seriously questioning some of the underlying philosophy, make sure you have a very effective out so that you don't destroy yourself or your career. Very important is focusing on what is relevant at your current career stage. Whatever career stage you are, you want to focus on that. If you are a graduate student, you probably don't need to worry very much about what the president of the university is doing, unless the president of the university is doing something that will dramatically affect the life of graduate students. So, but also part of your critical concerns are figuring out the skill sets that I need. If you're, for example, as a scientist, if you're thinking about moving into a management supervisory position with other scientists, then you might want to think about, do I have the skill sets that I need for problem solving with groups of people? And as I'm doing my work, am I focusing my work productively? Am I focusing my work in directions, whether I'm doing the laboratory science-based work, or am I focusing my efforts in how I'm managing people? I found that I had to do this very often in all of my years as a supervisor, is I very often had to think about, am I being the most productive way in working with this particular person that I supervise? And sometimes it would totally change the type of sort of mentoring type of activity I would have. So very important, focus on the things you need to do, get the tools you need to be successful. This mouse is increasing its chances of success of surviving its effort to get the cheese by wearing a helmet, as opposed to going into this without maybe some critical skills. I talked about a little bit earlier about, is it time to move on? Very important to occasionally stop and think and ponder both about the day-to-day work and the content of what you're doing. And are you thinking about what you need to be doing for what your next career phase is? Just a little bit of, again, a little mode, a time of reflection. And again, this is something that mentors can help prod their mentees to think about. Particularly maybe if you have a mentee that is sort of stuck and needs a little bit of, impetus to get some momentum to get them thinking about moving ahead. But again, wherever you are, you have to think about what your concerns are at your own stage, at whatever career stage you are. You can develop action steps. So obviously these are things that are really important. You need to get to know each other in the binary mentor-mentoring relationship. So you can figure out, okay, what are we going to accomplish together in our mentee-mentoring relationship, and figure out how you want to interact. And is it going to be, obviously now there's a lot of interactions that are virtual. And what are topics that are going to be off limits during the mentoring experience? That certainly is every person's right to draw boundaries and say, I only want to talk about the work. I don't want to talk about other things. And and the mentor may not want to talk about certain things. So as long as you discuss that, and some mentors, I did not have children by choice in my career. So I'm terrible at trying to mentor someone on how they could be a parent and be a scientist, because it's not my personal experience. So yes, that's an off-limit topic because I don't have expertise to help that person. Now maybe I can reflect back and forth and how we want to interact, and then figuring out what a regular meeting or contact schedule that you do want to have, how you're going to do that. I have a couple of people that I've been mentoring sort of over for about 20 years, and they're doing fine. These two individuals are off, they're pursuing their career, they're both in their late 40s by now, doing great. And our agreement now is they will contact me if all of a sudden they have a problem that they want to pick my brain on. But our minimum agreement is that they'll check in with me at least twice a year if everything's going well. And so that's our agreement in that case. There is another young person that I'm working with through the ACS Career Consultants that's a young chemist who's in a very difficult circumstance right now. So that person and I have agreed that we will interact at least once a week, just because of the complexity of those particular circumstances. But we agreed on that, and we agreed on what we wished to pursue in this particular case. Obviously, if you've agreed on that, figure out what your schedules are. Give and receive positive feedback, both sides. Mentee tell the mentor what's helpful, what's not helpful, and same thing by the other way. And have some sort of goals. These don't have to be lofty aims, but at least have a plan saying, well, you want to develop better public speaking skills, for example. If that's a goal, then say, okay, well, let's figure out how are you going to approach that? How are you going to practice doing that? When are we going to come back and revisit that? See what you think. How are we working on it? And then continually, any good mentor-mentee relationship, one person is talking 50% of the time and the other person is listening 50% of the time. So it's a true 50-50 relationship. And you always seek out new resources and opportunities. A good mentor would be identifying other people that it might be appropriate for you to interact with, maybe for a mentoring moment or a mentoring week, a mentoring discussion, or maybe for longer term issues. And I put these in just to be give us a little bit of lighthearted thoughts. So the do's and don'ts of a mentoring relationship, obviously you want to be at basic, you want to be a decent human being. But one of the things in a relationship, these are also good life skills actually, but in a mentoring relationship, you know when to listen and when to speak. And this is, I think, particularly important comment to mentors is that sometimes we as mentors want to rush ahead and tell our mentee what we think he or she ought to do. And sometimes we just need to listen to what they're saying, and sometimes listen to what our mentee is not saying. And sometimes if you're the mentor, you can speak, you're speaking, but you're maybe trying to draw out what the concern or the issue is that you need to deal with. And as someone who speaks far more than she listens, this is something I still have to continually work on. Another area of mentoring is learning people to be authentically their self, but thoughtfully. I mean, obviously, we want to know how to be the genuine individuals that we are, but we want to be ourselves thoughtfully in appropriate contexts. That what I am like in a work setting is not 100% the person I'm like away from work. And sometimes there are settings where you may not want to be your genuine self as much as you can be in other settings. But again, this is part of what we can learn from each other about when are the places that we can be our 100% genuine self, and when there are times do we need to reserve aspects of ourself and not fully have them all out there. This is obvious, and it isn't just mentors. You never want to embarrass your mentor or your mentee and put them in an awkward position, or call them out or embarrass them in front of other people when it's something that could be a conversation that could be quietly one-on-one. And certainly if you have embarrassed a mentor or a mentee, or put them in an awkward position, hopefully unwittingly as opposed to deliberately, a simple apology, of course, is always what helps. Having an appropriate sense of humor. Some people can be delightfully humorous and can be deliberately humorous. I'm one of those people who cannot be deliberately humorous. I cannot tell a joke in a speech, an appropriate joke in a speech. It's just not part of what I can do. And again, that's part of learning to be what yourself is. Where I find a sense of humor comes in handy is when things don't work well and no one was hurt and all my experiments blew up. It's like either you laugh or you cry. And part of that is also knowing how you deal with awkward situations or situations that didn't work out. And of course, there are a whole series of culture sensitivities and culturally appropriate senses of humor, and being sure that we're not doing things that are offensive. Again, that I think is one of our ongoing cultural challenges. Is and if in question, then don't try to be funny. Again, as with all of these other things, no matter what your actions are, they'll always have consequences. And part of what mentees and mentors both can learn is when you've made a mistake and you know it, the sooner you move in to rectify that mistake and make it better, then you have not created a bigger problem. Much easier to get this go to the supervisor and tell this vehicle ran into the soft cement rather than trying to hide it when it solidifies and then pointing it out. So, and there are consequences. That's just part of life. Mentors and mentees, mentors can actually help mentees learn what the unwritten and inside rules are. And those aren't necessarily sneaky or bad or illegal. It can be as simple as my staff had an unwritten rule about me that I didn't realize until I actually retired, and they gave me a farewell party and they were telling me all these things, and with a lot of humor. They had an unwritten rule that they shared with new people that joined our group, which was don't try to talk to Donna in the morning before she's had 2 cups of coffee, because she doesn't make sense and she'll be coming back to you later in the day to talk to you. So that was an unwritten rule, not a big deal. but it helped make the workplace go smoothly. And there are other inside rules that sometimes some workplaces, and when there are group meetings, some people, the big boss may like to sit in a certain chair, and maybe it's an inside rule. Dr. X always wants to sit in that chair, or never ask so-and-so a question. Again, that's just part of understanding what helps make the work go more smoothly and what are the rules. Sometimes there may be unwritten and inside rules that are rather insidious. And that is even more important for mentors and mentees to be clued in on. Obviously, keeping your expectations realistic of each other, mentor of mentee and mentee of mentor. And one area of having expectations realistic is, as you're having these mentor-mentee conversations, is each of you have to handle criticism. None of us like to be criticized. So we want to figure out, you have to handle the criticism. Sometimes handling the criticism says, I hear you, let me think about it a day, let me come back to you tomorrow. Again, my personal experience is when I receive criticism, I immediately get defensive. And I learned painfully to say, give me a moment or give me a couple of hours to think about that, and then I'll come back to you because I need to think about it, and rather than sort of losing my temper or being irrational. Mentors, first of all, we should not view ourselves, if we're mentors, as being miracle workers, and mentees certainly should not view them as miracle workers. We both parties, we should be honest. We have to look at painful realities. Nobody can go back and redesign the past. Very important to follow through and close the loop. In all my years of interacting and having a lot of conversations with lots of mentors, one of the comments that a number of mentors say is, my mentees don't follow through when they tell me they will, or they don't come back and close the loop. So that if a mentor asks a mentee, well, let me know in a couple of weeks how that's working out for you in your lab situation. And if you don't circle back, that's sort of closing the loop and failing to follow through. Mentors can do the same thing. When a mentee says, please check in with me next week and let me know. Most importantly, one single person cannot be a mentor that will meet every need that you have. Think of it as your board of directors of mentors. You may have one mentor that mentors you on work-life balance. You may have another mentor that mentors you on how to engage in community activities. You may have a third mentor that's helping you figure out how to write better. You may have another mentor who is helping you figure out how to be a more productive member of your research group. And mentors should not expect that they have everything that any given mentee will need. Very important for you to keep in mind. And people can be your mentor for 30 seconds. If you have a quick conversation, say at a social hour at a scientific meeting, when we get back to having scientific meetings, or it can be someone that may be a mentor that you interact with for decades. And you can't always predict when you go into a mentoring relationship which type it's going to turn out to be. So closing this up, getting really close to question time. Again, thinking about sort of all these concepts I've sort of thrown at you quickly. As you're thinking about a mentoring relationship, and given the need that you should have a board of directors of mentors, you should be thinking about, okay, what are the areas that I think I might want? Obviously, I would think the purpose you would want to have a mentor is mentors is because there's certain aspects about your professional life that you want to improve, maybe some aspects of your personal life that you would like to get some perspective on dealing with, and figuring out, okay, well, what are my goals here? What's the outcome? And whatever you want to have as an outcome, the outcome can always be modified. And how are you going to do it? How are you going to interact? How are you going to collaborate in a mentor-mentee relationship? And when are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? Again, agreeing how you're going to do and interact in that relationship. So with that, more critical questions that you need to think about, and I hope that during this seminar, each of you have thought about some things that you haven't been doing that maybe you think you ought to do in the context of the mentoring relationships you have. There are other things you might want to think like, yeah, I need to stop doing that in my mentoring relationships. And maybe there's some things you say, well, yeah, no, this is good. I need to keep on doing this as I proceed with my mentoring relationships. Again, these are good thoughts for life in general, but they're very applicable to mentoring relationships. And I have found, just as an example, when I'm in a mentoring relationship with someone, particularly with these doing these online internet sessions with young chemists, is sometimes these are not people I've known before, and very often, once I've gotten the basics of where they are in their career, I'll ask them to answer these questions. Well, what do you think you need to stop doing? What do you think you need to start doing? And what do you think you need to keep on doing? And we can very often develop out of that maybe some areas where we feel like we need to take the mentoring relationship into a discussion and pursuit of those particular areas. So I would say thank you. That's my LinkedIn.com. I'm very easily found on LinkedIn in the network. Networking is very important. Next week, I'll try to cover everything that I didn't cover in answering all your questions this week. So that's a quick little, and we're doing it May 29th, not Mary 29th. So now I think it's the question period, and I can stop the screen share, and I think, Mackenzie, you're going to throw out the questions.
Yes, thank you so much for that excellent talk. Yeah, if anyone has questions, you can raise your hand in the chat or ask a question in the chat, and I'll share it with the group, whatever you're comfortable with. It looks like we have an anonymous question already. The question is, how do you ask someone to be your mentor? How do you stir the relationship or start the relationship that way?
If it's usually, if there's someone you think you would like to be a mentor, approach them with a very simple, focused question that you would like to discuss with them. That it gives them the opportunity to answer your question and sort of see if the chemistry will proceed for you to be a mentor. So if, again, there's someone that I keep pulling out the PowerPoint examples, but let's say there's someone that you think has done always does a good job at their presentations, scientific presentations, very beautiful slides, very key articulation points. Maybe you want them to talk to you about that, saying, you know, is there a way I can learn from you about how to do those slides? I will tell you, nothing terrifies someone like me and maybe a lot of other people is if someone just walks up to you cold at a networking session or in the workplace and says, will you be my mentor? It's easier to start with a question of some subject, and maybe they can't answer it at the moment you ask them, maybe not in person, maybe by email, or however your mode is, and then take it from there. Sometimes if there's someone that you know well enough that you can ask, so if someone asks me, Donna, you know, I really would like to talk to someone about teaching in a liberal arts college, and can I talk to you about it? And I said, well, yeah, you can talk to me about it. I went to one as a student, but that was half a century ago. But let me connect you with someone who is currently an associate professor at a university. So you kind of think about the mentoring and networking that way. There's an analogy that I think will help, because sometimes you can't tell how the relationship from that very first question will go. Maybe someone said something in a talk, or maybe you read something that someone did in a blog or in some context, that you can always say, I was very intrigued to see this. I would like to ask you about, and then something related to that. And or find a connection. This is actually where LinkedIn can also be quite good if you're trying to find someone right outside your immediate geography. Is that helpful to? It's kind of like going out and seeing, when you're younger, seeing someone you think is kind of cute, and you've never seen them before, but you see them in the Starbucks every day, back when we used to be able to go to Starbucks. And you just walk up to this person you've seen every day for 3 weeks and say, will you be my boyfriend? Or will you be my girlfriend? We just don't do that. But you can start the conversation in that analogy by saying, oh, I see you've been coming here every day for a month. I see you every day. Sometimes the conversation goes nowhere. Sometimes it goes into a relationship, or who knows what. So that first question is probably a very important one.
That was a great answer. Thank you. Are there any other questions? I don't see any posted right now. Well, I'll ask one. So it sounds like you have a lot of experience mentoring online. Do you have any advice for those of us who are moving mentoring relationships from in-person to online?
For me, I'm a very visual person. And I really like interacting with people in real life. And I find giving a talk like this one is very difficult. I like to read people in the audience and see how they're responding. But I've actually found we are doing career consulting now using Zoom as a platform, so I can actually see the people that I'm interacting with. And I find that much more useful because they see me, I see them. And I think we have to be a little more, probably have to be a little bit more focused on saying, okay, what do we need to accomplish right now? And I've actually had several people that have connected with me through LinkedIn, have gone on and have said, I see you have, most of mine now are people who are thinking about retirement. So they want to talk to me. There's a lot of people I'm mentoring about their thoughts about thinking about retirement. So they will give me things. I'd like to talk to you about how do I plan to retire, but I don't want my organization to know. So we meet and we talk, and sometimes I give them exercises. I think if you're doing the online, people's time now is, all of our time is kind of weird, but being online I find far more exhausting than in person. So I think we want to be, if you're doing an online mentoring experience, be a little bit more intentional, maybe precede it by a bit of e-chat or email saying, well, it'd be great if we can cover this when we talk this week, and here's how long we'll have. I think this is going to be the wave of the future, particularly since I see a large number of the academic institutions are thinking about whether or not they even go back full time in the fall, what they can all take online. And I think we're just learning under this new social contract that we're becoming increasingly comfortable with it. And I think this medium is going to be here with, it's here to stay with us. Did I address that at all?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you do want to be intentional about it. If you're seeking someone to mentor or to be your mentor, find some sort of connection. If it's not anyone you know, if you've can find someone that can perform an introduction to them of someone you do know, that always helps. Or if you don't know them out of the blue, you can just send them an email or send them a LinkedIn. Every now and then I'll get one of those, actually from my college, from my undergraduate school, and someone said, I discovered this through LinkedIn and I see you did this and this. Can we talk sometime about how you made your career choices? And that's mentoring. It's probably just a conversation, but that is a mentoring experience.
All right, I think Sherwood, you had a question.
Yeah. Thanks for the great talk. It was very helpful. Was wondering if you have any insight into setting up a culture of healthy criticism, where I think a lot of mentors are pretty comfortable in the day-to-day criticism of like, oh, this is the tasks that need to be done, and talking about the science. But in terms of the broader, both trying to get difficult feedback about like the direction of our careers and whatever, and trying to give it, and I think it usually ends up the mentor will be afraid to be critical because they don't know the effect that it will have on the other person, and the mentee will be afraid to request criticism because that's difficult to handle. How do you set up, from both ends of the table, how do you set up that culture where there is that critical feedback in a productive way?
Yeah, I think it's particularly fraught when the person being mentored and the person in the, if you will, more senior, more experienced role is when it's in a supervisory, the advisor or the person whose lab you're in. It's fraught because that person is also responsible for assessing your performance. If you're a graduate student, they're responsible for helping assess when it's time for you to go ahead and write your dissertation. And I think if you find the time, if you can, in that situation, if you are the mentee, when you can have a non-distracted conversation with, if you will, the more senior person, let's say the lab leader or your advisor, and say, I'm not sure that I'm quite, what you're doing is fine, but I need to get some more sense of what I need to do, so that to the extent that you can be a little bit more specific about it and say, look, I know I may get upset when you start telling me that, and I may say, okay, let me process that and go back. You may have to make some of the first steps. And I think mentors, particularly those who are in a mentoring role for I've discovered graduate students and postdocs and very early career stage research scientists. I've had a lot of mentors tell me that I try to offer constructive criticism to the people that work for me, but they don't want to hear it. They don't think it's valid. And what I usually say, well, have you think about when you present it, how you present it, and is there an appropriate way to present it? And are you criticizing people in front of other people? Are you doing one-on-one? Are you scheduling individual one-on-one sessions with everybody in your lab to figure out what they need? And then sometimes just finding other people that can help you with that. It's a challenge, and I actually find in responding to questions like that I've had of late, it's almost a matter of going a little bit more in depth in speaking with the person and saying, okay, Sherwood, give me a little more specifics in your one-on-one situation that you are finding challenging. What's the issue you want to solve or need to solve? Because, and of course now we're all under a lot more pressure. And I think to the extent that you can initiate the conversation, my mentors, my PhD advisor and my postdoctoral advisor, were both amazing scientists. amazing scientists. But I couldn't get anything from them about how to be a scientist other than how to be an amazing scientist and write grants and write papers. So I had to find other people to do that. Part of it was gender related, but not all of it, because that was just not their comfort zone then. And I think you just have to keep thinking. And maybe there are peers. There is a very peer mentoring, meaning people who are at your same stage in career, in your organization, or maybe in other organizations. In this group, there might be a subset of you who have similar concerns that might want to form even your own little mentoring circle, bouncing ideas off each other, saying, I'm finding this challenge. And let's face it, there are some people out there that some of us may have had to work for that are real stinkers. They're terrible people to work for. They exploit us. They take everything we have and give us nothing in return. That's where mentoring is also useful from other people to help you be resilient. And as I often say, obviously that never happens in your field either. But that's also where the peer mentoring helps. Is it time for me to move along? Should I be looking for another position? Should I be looking for a different approach?
All right, it's getting towards 3 o'clock,
Yes.
so I think we're going to wrap up for today. I don't see any more questions. We will have a second session next Friday at 2 p.m. If you all want to join us for that. I've posted in the chat a link for a follow-up survey, and you'll also have an opportunity to ask additional questions. So if you think of anything in the next week, it can be addressed next week very easily. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Donna, for this great talk.
Great. See you next week.
Yeah.
Thank you.